Jesus says, be perfect as your Father who is in heaven is perfect. So does that mean we have to be perfect parents too? Because I don't know about you, but so often I just don't feel good enough. There's this expectation of perfectionism as parents, and I don't feel like I live up to that. So the question we've been wrestling with is, how do you overcome that? How do you ever feel good enough as a parent? And more importantly, is there any wisdom that the Bible can give us around this? Well, in our recent episode of our Beyond the Words podcast, we explored this topic of perfectionism as parents. We actually uncovered the true meaning of this one word in the Bible that totally changed how we understand perfectionism. Not just our own struggles with perfectionism as parents, but also how we talk about it with our kids. And so we will share this with you, the lessons we've learned as we've worked through this ourselves. So check out this portion of the recent podcast. And if you'd like to see the whole podcast about perfectionism in all areas of our lives, then you can find it in our free community. Just go to www.brandonrobbinsministry.com/community or click the link down in the description. Yeah. Let's talk about parenting.
Okay.
And the idea of perfectionism within our kids. Okay, so every parent says this, right? When their tiny baby comes and they say, you are perfect and God made you perfectly and you are created in the image of God.
Yeah.
So are we unknowingly instilling this concept of perfectionism in our children?
I mean, I'm thinking about when our little girls were born and they were perfect.
They were, weren't they?
I mean, looking back, there's a little bit of alien features, but in the moment they were absolutely perfect, right? But you're right. Like there is this sense of perfectionism within our culture and within each and every one of us. I mean, there's a temptation, right, to impose our own desires upon our kids, to impose some of the things that we expect or want them to do, and to kind of control them in that way. I mean, I remember, we wanted our daughter to take piano lessons. You loved playing piano. Yeah. And so we put her in these lessons, and it took us a couple of months to realize she just didn't enjoy the lessons. Like she just wasn't enjoying it. And so we had to pull that pressure off because that's what was driving her crazy, is she needed to meet this expectation of ours. And so we had to let her go. But I also think it's society's expectations. Mm-hmm. We live in a culture that says if you are not everything, you can't be anything. If you want to get into college, you have to have the best grades and you've got to be in all the sports and be the best at all the sports and be in all the extracurriculars and find time to serve and then be at your church and also rest enough. I mean, it's just impossible, right? And it's this expectation of perfection that nobody can attain. Yeah. And it's dangerous.
It is. But I noticed Claudia in our Beyond the Words community made a comment. I had to learn that we are born in perfection, but I am not able to produce perfection.
Amen.
Yeah. And I feel like that would be a great lesson to talk to our girls about.
Yeah.
Like I remember when our oldest daughter was 4, she was in preschool and she was coming home with homework at 4 years old. It was ridiculous how much homework they expected her to do. And at first we tried to encourage her. We'd sit down with her and we'd work through it together, but it just became clear. Like, is this pushing her to finish this homework? It doesn't matter. She's 4 years old.
Right.
We do not need to be putting this pressure on her. So whether you have little ones at home or even young adults, or maybe you're a grandparent, watching this idea of being perfect affect your grandchildren, and your children, how can we take what we learned today about the Bible's definition of perfect? How can we apply that? So how do we teach our kids how to have a healthy understanding of what Jesus means when he talks about being perfect?
And we've wrestled with this a lot.
Oh, yeah. All right. So we're going to share some strategies we've learned. But let me tell you, we are not perfect. There are probably better strategies out there. And there are probably things that we are still doing wrong. But for the sake of this podcast, we just wanted to share, here's what we do.
Yeah.
Okay?
So here's what we do. So just a couple of different strategies that we want to share with you. Strategy number 1, if you're the person who likes to take notes, is we found that it is really important, especially with your kids, to share your own imperfections. And I mean, we're talking about this in the context of parenting, but I think this could honestly be in any relationship, in a marriage relationship, in church relationships. Share your imperfections.
So sometimes I do that to the point of pointing out a mistake I made, naming my imperfection. It makes me think, just a couple weeks ago, I was making meatloaf and it flopped, right? It was awful. And I've made meatloaf before, but this time it was awful. And I'm like, why is this so yucky?
Yeah.
And then I realized that I doubled the amount of breadcrumbs that were supposed to go in the meatloaf. So, you know,
I mean,
it
yeah.
did not turn out. So in that situation, I talked myself through it. My daughter was in the kitchen with me. So I talked myself through that huge mistake that I made that impacted the rest of the family because we did still eat it. Which leads us to strategy 2. How do you talk yourself through the mistake? Modeling the language that I want my children to use when they show an imperfection or they make a mistake. How do you talk yourself through a mistake?
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things I find myself doing a lot of times is I love self-deprecation humor.
Yes, you do.
I mean, I love to make fun of myself. I do it in church on Sundays. You'll probably see me do it on this podcast all the time. But partly just because like I don't try to take myself too seriously. Like I know I'm an imperfect person. And so rather than living in shame of those things, like I make light of them sometimes.
Yeah.
I make light of my mistakes. And as a family, I think we do this a lot where we kid with each other when we say something funny or we do something kind of goofy. Like we just make it like that's normal. That's okay.
Yes.
And we can laugh about that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So my own language, I'll say like, well, that was so silly of me. Why did I do that? Or now I know for next time, I will not double the amount of breadcrumbs in my meatloaf.
Or make meatloaf, but I actually like meatloaf.
You do. You love meatloaf. So I will make it again. So this also reminds me when it was 2020 and the school shut down, our daughter at the time was starting kindergarten. So she had to do kindergarten virtually on a screen. So I hear her kindergarten's teacher refrain in my head all the time. Through this screen, I was hearing her teacher say, to make a mistake is to make a discovery. And that is something so beautiful to say to a kindergartner who is making all sorts of mistakes and trying to get through COVID at the same time, making a discovery. So changing like flaws or mistakes, however you want to look at it, into like, again, like it is this learning process. We're discovering something about ourselves or the world.
Yeah. It's just all about modeling the language that we use and helping to see that and show that to others. So the third strategy that we try to embrace is that of embracing and contextualizing their imperfections. So for instance, you know, when you're 5 years old and you're spilling milk, which this morning our 5-year-old spilled milk at the table.
Yes, she did.
And
Truth.
we didn't freak out over it. We didn't get upset about it. We were just like, get up, go get a towel and come dry it off and it'll be okay, right? Because we don't expect her to be perfect. We expect her to be 5 or 5.5.
She will correct you.
She
5.5.
will. And, you know, she's not 35. We don't have those kinds of expectations. So if she makes a mistake, it's okay. That's where she is in life right now. And we just try to model that all over the place. Like, I mean, even the two of us, like, as much as we think we've grown and matured, we know we still make mistakes. And so we have to let ourselves off the hook and just contextualize that for our kids.
There's also this great word, and it's only 3 letters, and it's the word yet. And I will say, if our daughter is trying to do her new gymnastics move and she keeps messing up or falling or she just can't land it like she wants to, I'll say, you haven't nailed it yet, but you will. Yeah. So, and if we can keep that word in their minds, yet, like I don't have to do it right now. I am still learning in the process.
Yeah. And then, well, there's one more.
Oh yeah. So we also apologize to our children and own up to the mistakes that we make as a way of admitting our imperfection. So if we lose our temper, if we are too busy to pay attention to something they're saying, or we blame them for something they didn't do, I'm sorry. I am still maturing. I'm still learning to be a parent. And beyond that, I'm still learning and growing as a follower of Jesus and as a person.
Yeah. And I mean, I think this is one of the things that's probably the hardest for us to do sometimes, because it requires so much humility, right? It's one thing to admit your imperfections, but it's another thing to admit your mistakes and those moments where they see you at your weakest.
Yes.
And you have to kind of own up to that, but you're teaching them that that's okay, and you're just showing them that we are growing together, right? And what matters here is that we love each other and we're going to grow together in this process. And as you grow and as you develop as a child, we're going to be right here with you, and nothing's going to change how much we love you.
Yeah, absolutely. We're in it together. So we just gave you all these ideas of how to respond to your children. But please know that we are not perfect. Here we go. We're going to admit it. We are still maturing in our parenting. We failed many times, and I'm sure we will fail again. So even at these strategies that we just talked about, but there you go.
And so here's where I think it's really important for us to follow the advice that we give our kids, right? Our oldest has only had 9 years to mature and figure out all of the different aspects of life. And we've only had 9 years to figure out how to be parents to our 9-year-old or our 5-year-old, 5.5-year-old, right? And let's be honest, right? We're way better now than when we started. I mean, do you remember some of the things?
Oh my goodness, yes. So when we were first-time parents and we had this tiny newborn and she had her first doctor visit checkup, we took our tiny newborn to the doctor, and of course, while we're there, she messed her diaper. And we looked at each other and we realized we didn't bring extra diapers.
I don't even think we brought a diaper bag.
No, we just brought the baby.
We just brought her.
We just brought the baby to the doctor.
Yep.
And I'll never forget, the nurse looked at us and she was like, "You're first-time parents, right?" But we made a discovery that day. We made a mistake and we made a discovery. Always bring the diaper bag with extra diapers.
Yes. If you'd like to see the full podcast, you can watch all of it for free in our Beyond the Words community. Just go to www.brandonrobbinsministry.com/community.